Afternoon. Dean Marquita Newell of the School of Education here at Loyola is going to start us off with a welcome. I'll provide an overview to the process we went through to revise the social studies standards and introduce our panelists. We'll then spend the majority of our time in Q&A with the panelists, and then I'll provide a brief closing. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Newell.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tachi. I would like to welcome everyone to the Revising Illinois Social Science Standards panel. My name is Dr. Marquita Newell, and I'm the interim dean for the School of Education at Loyola University in Chicago. We find ourselves coming together for this discussion at a most consequential time in education. It is a time of significant pain, a time of significant transition and uncertainty due to the pandemic. It is also a time of continual reckoning with justice and fairness. At the core of this reckoning is a struggle over truth, facts, and knowledge itself, which is why revising the social science standards in this time has added significance. When we think about revising standards, some may think of it as perfunctory, just another part of our job as educators. And that is true. It is just another part of our job as educators. But in reality, it is so much more. These standards shape our understanding of what is true about our world, past and present. They also help share and validate our lived experiences, especially those that are marginalized. So revising standards is really a key mechanism in how we continually improve upon our ability to tell the whole truth and develop our collective knowledge so that it reflects a wider view of lived experiences. So this is not just about revising standards. It is about making us a more informed, just, and fair society. And it is on behalf of all students, past and present and future, that I would like to say thank you to the team of educators and students who work to revise the standards so that they better reflect our diverse local and global communities. We will all be better for it. And with that, I welcome you to this evening's discussion, where we will hear from members of this team about the tremendous work that they have done. So please join me in welcoming everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Dean Newell, for your kind words and your powerful overview. We can't ignore the moment that we are in when it comes to social studies education. It feels as if what has been long simmering in and around our field and our profession has suddenly burst into the spotlight and is at the forefront of national politics. And I really believe that this work, which we started about a year ago, when the temperature was still a little bit lower around this, it has made these efforts all the more important. And I'm really proud to have been able to work with the folks we see here on the panel today and a large number of others to move Illinois to the forefront of what we need to do as a nation. Now, we learned just a couple of hours ago that the state legislature has officially approved the revised social studies standards that we're going to be discussing today, and they'll be implemented starting with the 2022-23 school year. This took us by surprise because we were expecting the legislative committee to take up the issue in September, but it's exciting news and it's a moment of celebration for all of us who are involved in the project. I'm going to share in a few moments through the chat links to a couple of documents, both of which were sent by email in advance. One is a side-by-side comparison chart compiled by the Illinois Civics Hub showing the current version of the standards and then the changes that have been adopted. The second is the official ISB policy document, which shows the entirety of the standards policy, but it's a bit harder to parse out the specific revisions there. It was a year-long process to draft this revision. Last summer, a number of folks at ISB felt that our social science standards, which had been comprehensively rewritten back in 2016, needed to be updated to support more culturally responsive and sustaining teaching in our classrooms. In the wake of George Floyd's murder and in the midst of a national movement for racial justice, this was work we could not put off. So Elizabeth Heiler, the lead social science consultant at ISB, convened a group of 50 educators from all corners of Illinois across all levels of the school system and from a wide range of backgrounds to meet weekly and collaboratively propose a revision to the standards. There was also a student advisory committee supported by Emily Blanchard, a social science education student here at Loyola. Personally, I'll say that this was one of the most talented and passionate groups that I have ever been a part of. It was a great learning experience for me to hear from some of the best educators in Illinois and understand what it means to teach social studies in pursuit of justice and inclusivity across the many varied communities we have in Illinois. Once our revision was drafted, it was submitted to the state board for approval. After initial approval and a public comment period where stakeholders from around Illinois added their perspectives, ISB gave final approval to the revised standards last month and forwarded them to the legislature. And today, the legislature gave the approval. That means we'll go ahead and implement these standards starting in the fall of 2022. So we're very lucky to have several of the group members, 6 educators and 1 student member who were deeply involved in the process to share their perspectives on why we revised the standards, how we revised the standards, and what this will look like in classrooms across the state. So our panelists today. First, Raven Nicole Altimer, social science teacher who has been proudly teaching in Chicago, serving the communities of Roseland, Englewood, and Bronzeville for the past 16 years. She is currently teaching at Englewood STEM. Seth Brady, social science teacher at Naperville Central High School. Dorlan Charles, social science and civic teacher at Powell Academy, Chicago Public Schools. Rachel Juarez, National Board Certified Social Studies teacher from Yorkville High School and president of her local union. Sarah Saeed, Director of Language and Equity Programs, Elgin Math and Science Academy. Monica Swope, Principal Education Consultant of Learning Dimensions, a Chicago-based educational consultant company. And Eric Veal, a rising senior at Willowbrook High School. In addition to that, Eric also serves in the Illinois State Board of Education Student Advisory Council. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm going to start by posing questions and ask one panelist to respond first. Other panelists can follow up after the initial response. We'll also again be watching the Q&A for any questions that are submitted that way, which we might fold into our conversation or to which we might respond directly through the chat. So I'm going to start us off here with you, Rachel, and ask, why did each of you get involved in this process?
Thanks. So I think when Liz Heiler from ISB contacted me about being a part of this, I believe my response to her was, this is exactly the type of work that I enjoy doing. I love being in the classroom day in and day out, but I like to be a part of things that I know are going to affect change in current students and future students, and just have a profound impact on students. I think these standards really support what is already happening in a lot of Illinois classrooms, but it's good to shed light on those. And I knew that this work would bring conversations forward that can sometimes be difficult to have, but I knew that I would want to be a part of those. And that these standards really, the revisions really show our students that they're valued in every Illinois classroom. And so that type of work is just so appealing. And I knew that I'd be working with people who would have different opinions than me, but who overall felt the same way about wanting to change things. And I think everyone on here, as at one point in time said, this has been the best professional development, that we've ever been to. So I was so happy to be a part of it.
Hi, my name is Raven Altimer. Liz Heller reached out to me, and I was part of the first initial meetings. I thought this was a great opportunity to work with educators across the state of Illinois, and that to me, that's the only good thing about the pandemic, is that I don't think in any other circumstance we would have people from across the state working collectively at the same time to get different perspectives. And I think I knew that it was going to be a great opportunity to make Illinois the center of a more robust, more inclusive, more equitable social science education.
I personally got involved in this process to collaborate with other experts in my field, just like what Raven and Rachel said. I also wanted to uplift the voices of marginalized and disenfranchised groups. As educators, we should ensure that students are exposed to stories that historically have been omitted from textbooks, i.e. immigrants, women, and other minorities that have participated in creating the changes we see in our society today.
I think for me, it's also being a product of the system. And so I think in my learning, there was a lot of missed opportunities to elevate my voice and the voice of other communities as well over, the last 20, 30 years. And so now we have this opportunity and let's take it.
Hi, my name is Monica. So I wanted to kind of echo what Sarah had mentioned. As I'm a consultant now, but I was a high school history teacher, and I believed in incorporating pretty much the history of those who have been underrepresented throughout the narrative of history, whether they were Indigenous people, whether they were women, whether they were those who were not the ones who had the benefit of being in power, whether they were the ones who chronicled or document their history orally, because it tended to be omitted for those who had written history. So this was just something, although I did it in my classroom, you might have colleagues who did not do that. And so this was a great way for me to be part of something that's rich, that in some way will encourage more educators to take on the practices. And I know we're all of us on the panelists, as well as those who have come, are probably like, yes, why not? Why isn't that something that's the norm? But I wanted to be part of a group that is moving towards making this be very normative. And then the other thing is, I am a proponent that this is not just for the families of color. This is not just for the students of color. This is for all students. All students have to hear these stories that come from either marginalized, if that's what works, or underrepresented communities, because all of these individuals make up what it means to be part of our society, what it means to be part of a global community, as well as what does it mean to be an American, as well as being a part of an Illinois resident.
I echo much of what has been said across the board. I was actually part of the 2016 standards process, which began actually 3 years earlier in 2013. And really my interest in this, and I came into it about halfway through, at a student who was actually looking at how the Illinois standards might be revised to become more inclusive. And my interest in it really is there's many students who weren't seeing themselves in their curriculum unless an individual teacher took that task upon themselves to include them. And that's not right, and that's not just. And I think, the bigger picture, as Rachel mentioned, this type of work is being done already across the state, but it is not necessarily seen as the norm or the center of teaching. It's marginalized. And my interest in this group this team really is to center individuals and people. If for our communities to be strong requires that everyone is included, or there's harm across the board.
Hi, my name is Eric Veal. As a student, I got involved inside this process because I felt the need to make sure that all students are able to achieve a level of cultural competency, because I feel like that's so important to be able to compete inside our world. And so I was a part of a group of students, and we did ask the question, why is it that we put learning the Pythagorean theorem and different things like that over cultural competency among students. So that was something that was really a conversation. And I think that would kind of kickstarted our work in it.
Thanks very much, everyone. Dorlan, I want to start with you this time. What do you see as the most important changes in the revised standards?
Thank you, Charles. The new standards do a few important things that I've noticed. So number one, it allows students to discuss, deliberate, and to investigate the world we live in by analyzing multiple perspectives. Number two, it now provides a space for students to challenge and question systems of government or century-old structures that we had in place. Number three, we can better understand how marginalized groups were impacted during that process. And one specific middle school civic standards that we came across, we now have students will have the opportunity to synthesize how the changes over time in the applications of laws and granting or denial of rights have impacted government, public officials, bureaucracies, and different levels in the US territories, and tribal nations within the United States, which will now give way to take critical look into indigenous people of this land or other groups who have been disenfranchised by the denial of their constitutional rights, as who, leads a devastating negative chain of events. So those are some of the core key important changes that I've noticed.
I actually spent this week playing with the standards. Our team had written over the last 3 years, they've written social justice curriculum for early learners. We're talking, kindergarten here. And so when you look at some of the early learning standards, it really, you can really connect with them really well in terms of like the students learning the history of underrepresented peoples. So as a school, when we talk about Thanksgiving, we're not talking about pilgrims. We are talking about the history of indigenous people and how indigenous people have really helped build our society. And so that's really where there is so much opportunity to tell a whole story.
I believe that the standards give a great opportunity for a more active education or a more active role for students to take part of in their education. It's not just teacher focused or teacher centered. It's more of a coalition between student and teacher, or students and teachers, to go towards what should social science education look like? What perspectives have we not heard before, which has been said before? So I love the action-based, inquiry-based, and the amount of perspectives that have been added to the standards to make sure that those untold stories are finally being told, at least have the chance, opportunity to be told across the board.
I think one of the things that really stood out, and I have to one, and first of all, Seth, and there's others who were part of that 2016 revision, like good job, because I remember the old standards and they were not great. Okay. So, I applaud the 2016, 2017 team and pushing us forward. I think one of the things, and when they pushed us forward, there was the attempt to make it more aligned to what was the expectation for historical inquiry. Okay, so if we're looking at the whole thing of asking these questions, where there's taking informed action. So then I get into this revision piece, and this revision piece, in one way, and my thought is, it kind of really amplifies this whole notion of what does it mean to have high quality instruction within the social sciences. What does that really look like? And you cannot do high quality social science instruction without keeping in mind the equity and the inclusivity in mind, because that is really critical. And you cannot even do a TIA or taking informed action without having those components. So I think one of the things that I think that this team, and there was many teachers, but definitely it was such an amazing team that are in front of you today, we really had to be intentional about looking at how do we make sure these standards reflect and really help our students to unpack understanding systems of power and oppression and how that has an overarching effect upon groups that tend to be underrepresented, marginalized, and their stories have been omitted or even silenced. We also then had to encourage them, and it was it's also like a fine dance, because you cannot have this be a story full of like trauma and racism and things like that. That just doesn't, how do you empower the individual so they can, one, take this knowledge and feel not just like a victim, but feel like I have information, I feel empowered, so I can move forward and I can actually activate the change as they expected of taking informed action. So it gets to that activism in a real quality and very inclusive and equitable way. Not just sound bites, not just something said, not just something that this is good to actually do, but this is all bringing in the community, bringing our students to be actively involved in that.
Yeah, my answer to that question is similar or relates to what Monica said. With the note that I really believe what these standards do is catch up to what educators are already doing in the classroom. I think what the biggest change is that the standards really center students, not only in terms of their histories and identities, but in the inquiry process itself, really looking to students to generate those questions, looking to students to think about those questions from the get-go as actionable, things that they're going to eventually take action on as the output to their work in the classroom.
And I focus mainly on government and geography standards. And so I would echo again what Seth and Monica and Raven, everyone said, is everyone can, I think, attest to, there were some times where we would be discussing one word for an hour, about the value of a word or what it meant to certain people. And so we put a lot of time in looking at the order in which we were, what are we actually asking students to analyze? We changed a lot of that, because we felt like it wasn't always that we needed to change language or add language, but sometimes we felt like the standards were cornering students into analyzing and coming to a foreground conclusion. And we said, well, that's not really what we want to do. We want to, allow them to come to a conclusion. So I think there's lots of times where you'll see some specific, the standard might look similar, but if you read them side by side, you'll see that the standards, we've changed some of them, revised them to allow for a much more open discussion and inclusivity.
Thanks. I really want to pull on Monica's point about, bringing out not just teaching the struggles and the dark corners of American history, which are important for us to explore and for our students to understand, but also to have a deep appreciation for the achievements, the accomplishments, the contributions, that American history is made up of many different threads that are interwoven, and sort of understanding the unique nature of each of those different threads across communities. I think that's one of the deeper goals we want to get to, not just simply have students have a single narrative of American history in mind, but to be able to see American history from the perspective of many different communities. And I think that's where Monica was pushing, and I think that's really core to what we have to do moving forward. And the revised standards give us space and encourage us to do that. And along similar lines there, I want to turn to you, Raven, and ask, how do you expect to see this play out in the classroom? What do you think will be new and different in our classrooms now?
My response to what you just said, kind of piggyback, and then this question is, it allows space for joy. It allows space for empathy. Even before I knew what history was, I've loved history. I'm aging myself. If you remember American Tail and Fightful, that was all history. That was my favorite cartoon when I was a kid. American Girl dolls. I was born apparently to be a history nerd. So as a Black female from Chicago, there wasn't a lot of stories that inspired joy within me that I can easily access as a kid, but I still loved history. I would have to go and find other stories and other tales, and then have to find ways to empathize with that. With these standards, it's the forgotten stories of not just pain and sorrow, but those forgotten stories of joy, or how you can change whatever that joy, pain, and sorrow may have been, you can channel that so that students can make informed actions and inquiries and overall be better citizens overall. I think that like once I got to college, or if I did my own independent study, that's when I found my own stories of joy. But we know a lot of students wouldn't do that naturally by themselves. Hopefully, we can inspire a whole new generation of educators and students to try to find the hidden story, to find the joy in social studies. So it's not just black and white and all sorrow.
I agree. And I think it gives educators an opportunity to learn about their students because we have those dynamics of inquiry and student voice. When I was in high school, I was almost denied a leadership opportunity for student leadership because my teacher and advisor had heard me talking about a Palestinian protest. And she didn't even know where Palestine was on a map and didn't even understand the issues. And I think now educators get to open their ears more and listen to students talk about, what they care about and what their families care about. And it really opens up more opportunities for students, as we say, to see themselves in the curriculum, and really educators have that empathy for students.
I agree with both of you. And I think that one thing that I hope to see in the classroom from these changes is more discussion about, what might be missing from curriculum, because these are standards, not curriculum changes. And I think it might be a discussion where a teacher just simply looks at someone and says, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what they want. And to open those discussions and to say, what is missing from our curriculum? And to be able to start looking for those stories, or reaching out to more resources, and to sort of say, like, I think sometimes there's teachers who would love to add more. And this sort of gives them a little bit more of a pathway of how to support students from all backgrounds, or at least a starting point, a talking point, so they can see the holes in the curriculum.
I want to say, and I'm happy about this, but I definitely see that these standards open up the opportunity that students are not taught history the way I was taught. I was taught in a very Eurocentric, very male-centered. I mean, I remember junior year of high school, and I was a fairly precocious child, I guess. And I asked a teacher, like, when will we talk about, like, my people? And the teacher, and well-meaning, said, like, in other words, that's not my responsibility. If that's something of interest, you study it. And that's what I did. And that's what got me interested in wanting to learn more about history. But I will envision that these standards will encourage definitely teachers who've been doing this to amplify and affirm that what they've been doing for years, they were right on target. It would also challenge, and I'm just going to be very transparent, there is a population of teachers where this is not necessarily something they really wanted to do, because it takes them out of their comfort zone, or maybe challenge them to confront their own implicit bias when it comes to underrepresented people. So challenge them to kind of and by it being something by it being standards, by it being approved by the state of Illinois, it challenges them to, like, okay, you do need to change your practices. You do need to reflect on your practices if you intend to be a powerful teacher to your students. I do believe all teachers want to be powerful teachers to their students. Yes, I do believe that. I think the pathway and how to get there, sometimes teachers do not know the pathway, but I hope that these standards will challenge those teachers, those who have been doing this, to go even further, to uncover those stories and incorporate the students that usually have been omitted, or their stories have been omitted, as well as really in a way agitate in a good way teachers who may not necessarily want to buy in, so that they can begin to confront and the implicit bias they might have. Because this is not, in my mind, is not just about uncovering omissions, is not only about representation, but this definitely is very close to this whole notion of how do we help with student achievement. And if we have preconceived notions and it's been part of the system, then how are we as educators can really activate the type of learning for all of our students, to activate the type of change. So to me, it seems like it's all kind of intertwined. So I would hope that definitely it affirms all of my colleagues who are on this space, and those of you who are listening who are like, oh, we've been right all along. But I hope it agitates and challenges those educators who kind of need this, and they need something that's kind of like codified, in a way to encourage them to really look at the mirror and reflect on what they're planning to do with their students.
This will break up for me the monotony of traditional teaching, right? So in hopes of students wanting to now become an agent of change in their community through inquiry, students will be taking, I see, a bolder step in receiving a more holistic understanding of the world that they live in. I expect to see students wanting to be more eager and excited coming into their classes and becoming historians, right? I noticed that there's a statistics that says that social science history is the least favorite class through all students. And so by these new standards, I hope to see that students will be eager, they're excited, they want to learn, they want to hear the stories and perspective of marginalized people, indigenous people, women that we typically would not see from the history book. So I'm excited that I had the opportunity to participate in this process.
I would say one thing that we should expect to see is more relationships and authentic ones at that. Having now the doors open for students to talk about their family or either things that they've seen, I think will be something that will actually help teachers and help students to be able to know that they have a support system. And I think that will go a very long way.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was you, Eric, that when we started to, when we were showing the group of students the initial standards, and you saw that actionable questions drive inquiry, I think you responded like with a smile that, yeah, I can see like going through these different aspects of, say, a history class, knowing that in the end, you know, you'll be able to address something that is in your current world, just ups the engagement. And I think that is hopefully, you know, I think when you set students free, they do amazing things. And it actually cultivates the sort of relationship that you're talking about, where the teacher becomes the support rather than the sort of giver of knowledge. And that's what I'd expect to see if and when these standards are fully implemented, which is my sincere hope.
Well, thanks, everyone. Let me start with you, Monica, this time. Why was this work important to you, and why do you think it should be important to everyone?
Well, I've been very blessed to kind of play various roles in education. I didn't choose education. I'll caveat, education wasn't my first choice. Education found me. But I've had the role of being a classroom teacher. And excuse me, I sound a little emotional because I do take my job very seriously. Educating young people is critical. But I was a classroom teacher, I was a district-wide administrator, and now I have this role as a consultant. And I personally like to still stay as connected as I can to the reason why I got into education. The reason why were the learners. The learners were the ones that found me and chose me to be, you know, to have this opportunity to be part of their academic journey. So any opportunity for me to like take off the consultant hat or take off the administrator hat, or, you know, I teach higher ed, but take off that hat and really begin to really kind of play in the environment where the students are at is where I want to be, because it helps me to be grounded. It helps me to be centered. It helps me to constantly reevaluate my why for why this profession almost 25 years later was the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I think, you know, when I was asked, first of all, I found it to be a wonderful opportunity. And it's like, yes, I want to do something for schools, but also I want to do something for me as well, to constantly really keep in mind. So it's not like that ivory tower, or it's not like the administrator who hasn't been in a classroom in like so many years. But what is most important is what is affecting our students and how you're impacting the students. And I think for all of us as educators, that's kind of where we always need to play. Let's play in that sandbox, okay? And enjoy that, because that's where the fun is.
You know, as a
educator who works with early learners at the elementary level, I always say that kids are never too young to learn about this content. And my experience starts as early as 4 years old in terms of activism. My mother and her friends were very upset to see G.I. Joe produce the Nomad, who was a villain that was supposed to portray a Middle Eastern terrorist. And they took us all to Toys R Us to protest this. So at 4 years old, we were experiencing this, and they did remove Nomad off the shelves. This was in the 80s. Tells you how old I am. But, you know, when you think about this, there are a lot of teachers at those levels that really try to move away from having these conversations. And I always say there's nothing wrong with having a woke kindergarten. You need to. And so really this opens up those doors that personally I feel need to be open.
I'll invite anybody else from the group who'd like to tackle this question.
I'll say for me personally, the work is important because I think as a student, a lot of times we as students don't get asked, what do we want to learn? I think a lot of times it's assumed, this is what you learn this, and you're going to be happy with it. And if not, you're going to get it done and you're going to be done with it. And I believe that outlook on education needs to be changed. As a student who I used to live in Chicago, I've seen what goes on there. I now live in the suburbs of Chicago, so I see the differences. And I think for me, that's really a driver for me to kind of keep working, keep going. And my mom's a teacher, so for me, school is never out. You know, I understand kind of what's going on, and I do think that it's important that students have a voice inside of what's going on in classrooms and even what's being taught on a statewide level.
I think it's important, the work we've done, which we are just a small group of all the great, and some of them on this call, educators who engage in this work. And it's challenging to have that vertical and horizontal alignment. But just like Sarah said, and Dorlan can speak on this more than I can, I'm not about that elementary life, but there's topics that should be introduced younger, in the younger grades. And this is hopefully a stepping stone to what the next 2.0 version of this, or 3.0, since it's happened 2016 version of, you know, we can have a robust curriculum. We can have more perspectives. This should be an ongoing thing. This shouldn't be standards that are made once and then they should be, this is a living document like the Constitution. Sorry, Dort.
Yeah, I'd say the reason this is important, and maybe to get a little philosophical about it, is, you know, we're in a period of rapid transition, both as a nation and as a globe. And it is absolutely critical that students get the best possible social studies education they can get. We need informed, engaged citizens who know how to learn. And these standards set up the space and the structure to make that happen and move out of the way, I think, you know, the perception that things have to be done in a particular way. So, you know, I really see this as an update really to 2016 as opposed to an overhaul. It's opening up the space to a broader community, more inclusive, more looking at the world in a way that affects all of us. And that sort of position is required to be able to sense yourself as a community and not just you know, a particular group within a community or a particular individual within a community.
I think for me, I echo all the sentiments that everyone said, but I think tend to look at that one student, you know, the idea that in our classrooms, we have to assume that we have a trans student. We have to assume that we have a student of color. We have to assume that we have a student who has, you know, a deaf family member. We have to assume that we have all these people in our classrooms, and they're not always going to vocalize what they need. And we don't always ask them, you know, what do you need? As educators and as adults, we tend to impose on them what we think they need, how we think they want to celebrate their culture, how we think they want to celebrate. And so to me, this work is really opening up conversations, especially with those who are against it, especially with those who are afraid, especially with those who are unsure how to incorporate these things. So for me, it's about that one student, and to know that we have to have relationships with our students in order for them to learn. And in order to have relationships, you know, we have to have trust, and we have to build culture. And if they don't see their culture in our classrooms, you know, then they disengage. So it's about those students that are never going to speak up for what they need, but once we can show them that we are here to support their culture, even if it is something that has never been done in the classroom before, we're more likely to engage those students.
Thank you so much for those responses. That was fantastic. I want to turn now to you, Eric, because as a student, I think you have a unique perspective on this. But what do you think teachers can do, social studies teachers in particular, can do to create a more inclusive learning environment?
I would say step one would be building relationships. Taking the time to not only learn about your students, but learn about yourself also. I think that's a big part of going into teaching and going into trying to educate anyone, I think, is actually knowing yourself, and then as well as knowing your students. So one thing that I know I challenge inside our school district is that, you know, besides the first day you learn names, you learn pronouns, but you actually have those, you take time to actually learn what students know and what they don't know. And that doesn't mean taking a test. It doesn't mean giving a slip saying, write this down, but that means taking the time out of your day to kind of stop and have a conversation. So I think what I would really recommend would be to take the next step and build relationships, foster them, and don't let them in after the class is over. If it's a year-long class, don't let that be just a one-year conversation then over. It should be something that follows them. And I'm not telling you to follow all of your students, but I am saying saying hi and having a quick conversation is always welcome. So I just think to build inclusivity inside the classroom has to start with relationships.
Eric, you're hard to follow up. You kind of like stole what I was going to say. Like legit, like survey your students, poll your students, but do it often, like voting in Chicago, early and often. Just keep on doing it, right? So, and it's not just a one stop, and ask students what they want to learn. Do a QFT, question formation technique. Have students pick out the essential questions. Have students pick out or choose what their assessment is going to be, right? What's the purpose of learning? What's the purpose of what we're doing? Are you getting what you need from this? And if you're not, how can we make this work? Is how I try to approach all my classes, because it's not my education. Yes, I'm growing as a profession, but in the end, it's not my education. It's my students' education. And if their only exposure to history education is through me or limited through me, then I want to make sure they get as much as they can in the time we have together.
Eric, you are hard to follow. I agree. But also, you know, thinking not just about the relationships with the students, but knowing the communities they come from. And so I'm going to talk from the world of not just social studies, but I'm also going to talk about from the world of ELL, bilingual and multilingual education, because that's where my origins of my career have been. And, you know, I like to ride the school bus, which I don't know, for those of you who are becoming teachers, that's a conversation you need to have with your administrators. Like, can I ride the school bus? I like riding the school bus. I learn where my students live. I learn what do the communities look like. Sometimes, like, I'm an early bird, so I go to work at like
5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. I drive around the community and I see what's happening in the morning. I see who's going to work, where they're going to work, how they're getting on the bus. And that helps me learn about the community, and even learning about the community's movements, learning about its grassroots movements, not just the service organizations, but the grassroots movements and the citizens, even taking time to sit in and even some now they put them on Facebook, like watching a city council meeting and just learning what are the issues in the community that your students and their families are facing.
I think a recommendation, this is not easy work. It's hard work and it's reflective work. And I think for educators, and I know we want to get it right. And this is one of those things where you aspire to get better at getting better at versus getting it right. And I know there'll be some teachers that feel as if, you know, like they might feel if they don't get it right, then is that a reflection on, like, are they a racist teacher or things like that? I would like to encourage them to not be hard on themselves and forgive themselves as they're going through this growth process, because it is a growth process for all of us. When we're looking at teaching for equity, truly teaching for equity, really helping students to interrogate systems of power, really helping to increase the stories of marginalized people. This is challenging, because if it wasn't challenging, it would have been done hundreds of years ago. And there have been systems in place to make sure that this did not come into fruition. So I would say my recommendations would be try not to say I'm going to get it right or feel like it's an ongoing process. And then also forgive yourself when you make mistakes. You know, I've made mistakes with pronouns in the classes I teach. I see it at the Zoom, but I still called and it's like, oh my gosh. And I went to the individual and said, I'm so sorry, my bad, please forgive me. So, you know, really be cognizant of not to really, you know, put yourself down. This is a growth process, but aspire to be better at being better at.
I think for recommendations for teachers is to just take some time to reflect where you're at in this process. Don't shy away from where you're at in this process. Don't shy away from reaching out to other teachers, to mentors, to us, to anyone, just to start those discussions. And if you start to identify some areas that you can grow on, then go with those. You know, just start where you can start and tackle this, you know, small at first. And as you get more comfortable, it'll start to come more naturally, and, you know, just work together with other teachers and reach out. There's lots of online communities in place, and just be open to reflecting on the practices in your classroom that, you know, you might not have even noticed, or those questions that are coming from students that, you know, previously you may have pushed aside because it wasn't a part of the curriculum. And, you know, to start asking yourself, why isn't it part of the curriculum? Is there a way for me to start changing? Because local school districts will still have control over the curriculum and the resources. So it's time to start to join those committees and ask your districts what you can do. You know, to start looking at the authors of your textbooks, to start looking at the authors in your libraries, just to start asking those questions, and just asking those questions sometimes is enough for change. You know, in my own school, I simply asked the question, why do our bathrooms painted pink and blue? It just didn't sit right with me. You know, I just said, I felt like we're gendering these students early on. And I said, is there a reason, you know? And, you know, this summer they repainted them. And I saw a student coming out of one of the bathrooms, and she said, why'd they paint the bathroom, to her friend? And she said, you know, pink is for girls. And her other friend looked at her and said, yeah, but why? And why do you think that? And it was just a conversation starter, you know, and I sent a quick text to my superintendent and said, they noticed, you know, and they're having that conversation now. So as an educator, if you see something, just start looking into it and start asking the questions yourself. And you may find that you want to continue a practice, and you may find that you want to change something. I want to change everything, you know. I didn't know that that's how my career was going to go, and I feel like maybe when I started going through the national board process, that's another recommendation, go through the national board process. You will learn so much about equity in the classroom. You'll turn around and you won't even believe the things you did before. So just start asking questions of yourself and your own practice and your school's practice and your authors and your textbooks, and just start somewhere.
I would say to take Eric's advice. Cultivating those relationships is so critical. And I really think, this model of inquiry sets up that type of relationship naturally, where teachers become the support to students, and it creates that channel of communication. I think the other thing these standards do, which makes the recommendation easy, is, when you're thinking about building that relationship, you're thinking about, the ecology each student comes from, which includes their own personal background, but it also includes things like race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all the sorts of things that are impacting who they are as a person and who they are in the world. And so considering those things in the course of relationship building, I think, is how we get to inclusivity, which is really caring about one another in deep and important ways.
Yeah, and I want to pick up to the allusion you made to how that fits in the curriculum set, and that I think one of the important ways we can be inclusive is to regularly ask our students if they see themselves in the curriculum. How often do they see themselves? How often do they see their families? How often do they see their communities? How often do they see their ancestors? And use that as one of our measuring sticks to make sure that our students see themselves in their wholeness reflected in the curriculum, and they see that multiple times. I think that's the place where we really start to generate a meaningful sense of inclusivity and empowerment, that we ourselves are part of, or what we're studying, so that we can know ourselves, know each other, and move forward in a much more deep and meaningful way. All right, so I want to close this out with sort of a lightning round set of questions. So I'm just going to ask you for short responses. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. What do you think is next for social studies in Illinois?
I think within the schools, it's, Eric talked about building relationships and how teachers need to build the relationships with students and within themselves. And I think with schools, it's really now, as administrators, I'm going to talk from that viewpoint, we need to create space in order for teachers to take the time to self-reflect and create those spaces in our professional development and even in our boardrooms, all the way to the top. Okay. Like when we're thinking about that. And so really now that self-reflection with educators is critical at this point in order for us to continue to move forward with these standards.
I really think that these standards are the opportunity to encourage and engage in the work that we do. I know I've already said this previously, but it's a starting point. This is the end point. It can open up conversations. I didn't know until I taught in Rochelle and I had students who had 30,000 head of hall, what their perspective was and what their life experience was. So when we add these different things, we can learn each other. And I think that would make this whole world better if we can understand what somebody's life is like in their shoes.
I think looking forward is most definitely talking about shifting and emphasizing more on equity and cultural competency inside of the classroom and outside of it. And I also think is improving on student engagement and getting students involved in what's going on inside of our classrooms and making sure that students feel like they have a seat at the table inside of what they're learning inside of their classrooms.
I want to add to what you mentioned, Eric. I think the engagement is significant in their schools, in their classrooms. And I would also like to see social studies, this would be my and, I would also like to see social studies get outside of the building, actually pairing up classrooms to social justice agencies and things like that. One of the most powerful thing that happened, I had a student who runs an NGO and one of the reasons she gave was when she was in high school, I headed some club that dealt with diversity and equity and whatnot. And she said it changed her life. And she felt compelled to, her life work was to do this NGO. I would like to see that and I love what you said, Sarah, kindergarten classes, first, second, our kids can do it. And so it's us as teachers who could be able to create that environment for them so they can be engaged in the classroom, outside of classroom, within their communities and globally as well.
Yes, Monica, absolutely agree. Being that I am a teacher at Chicago, I love my department. The social science and civic engagement department has done a fabulous job with the Participate curriculum that we have both at the 8th grade level and the 11th grade level, where our students can see themselves doing the work outside of the classroom through inquiry. I want my students to be powerful civic actors within our community. And I think these standards provide us with a framework and a building point to get that done. I want to know when I retire just a couple years from now, that I can pass the baton to my students and that they are engaged, they are informed, they have that literacy component where they can look something online and decipher, is it false, is it fiction, and then go from there. Is it true information that they're coming across? I want my students to be active participants within their community. I want them to have that sense of empowerment, that sense of pride, that sense of, you know what, I live here and I want to make sure that I am safe, my family is safe, and I'm going to make the right decisions so that I can be successful in life in whatever capacity that may look like. Eric did a beautiful job in discussing that sense of having community in the classroom. As an educator, I have to create that safe space for my students. When they walk into my classroom virtually or in the building, they need to say, oh, you know what, Miss Charles loved me. I can come every single day. If I did something wrong, the next day she's going to forget about it and give me a second chance. Sometimes they need to see that from us. They need to know that I am going to give them that wraparound support that they need. I want my students to understand that the work that we're doing here has the greater purpose. I need my students to also understand that it does not stop in the classroom. I'm going to be expecting them to then advocate on their behalf using that student voice. There's a couple of my students that I saw, my valedictorian, he is going to be the next president of the United States, and I need to be able to vote for him, right? And that comes with that community, that purpose. I need to also have that relationship with parents. That's something else that we need to bring forth within this work that we're doing, having everyone participate in this conversation. I think looking forward to the next steps, immediate next steps is also professional development. I'm going to be honest with you. Part of that recommendations for my teachers, look within yourself. If you are not comfortable with the work that we want to do now, start the research process. Or social studies may not be the avenue for you anymore. You may need to go somewhere else. But if you are ready to dig deep and do the work, come aboard, help us collaborate together. I'm always available. I know everybody here on this panel is available as well. Look to other social science teachers within your district, your network. Don't do this alone. Do not feel as though that you are by yourself, because this work can be a bit challenging if it's outside of your comfort level. So I employ everyone, do your due diligence, start doing the research now. Fall of 2022 is around the corner, as you guys know. So with the changes that we have made, I think all educators are going to be excited. Even students now are going to be excited to come into our classroom.
I think you guys said it all. I really do. And I think the only thing I could add potentially to say, where does social studies go in Illinois next? I think it's going to start reaching outside of our own community and just connecting with others. I teach human geography, and I have a friend in the city who teaches human geography at Hubbard High School, and Hubbard High School learns about Yorkville, and Yorkville learns about Hubbard. And I think it's time that we have more schools that are connecting and looking at the standards together and the curriculum together and saying, you know, it's one thing for you guys to hear about what happens in a more rural area or to what happens in a more urbanized area or what services are available or are not available. It's another thing for us to connect our classrooms together and for the students to be able to ask each other questions that, you know, only they can ask. It's I think as this starts to move forward, I hope to see more connection of classrooms and students across the state because our state is very diverse.
I would agree with that. You know, this generation has proven itself to be willing to step to the plate and bring issues to the table. I think as social studies teachers, though, in addition to that activist piece, we need to, what I think should come into the curriculum next is a whole series of peace building skills that help provide students with the skills to mediate, to be citizens, to enact restorative processes, and to see those processes modeled in the classroom. You know, if we want to raise democratically engaged citizens as parents and as teachers, those need to be modeled in the way we structure our classrooms too. And I think these standards open the door for that sort of process to occur.
I think the greatest thing that our state could learn is what we have learned being part of this work. With the vast majority of educators that I worked with on this project, I didn't know before, right? But I genuinely love them and appreciate them for their perspectives, for their viewpoints, and how they made me a better teacher. So that's what I hope for all this.
Yeah, and this today reminds me of how much I appreciated meeting with you all and how much I miss hearing you and learning from you each week on Tuesday afternoons. This has been fantastic. So first, I want to encourage all of the panelists to be on, all the audience to be on the lookout for more information from ISB. I know that they are developing guidance materials, planning info sessions, and more. So you should be on the lookout over the next year for the for supports they're going to be offering for the rollout and implementation of the standards. If you have suggestions or requests for what that might look like, I encourage you to contact ISB through their website. Leave a comment, send a message, and make those requests. Identify what it is that you think would be helpful. I want to thank Hannah Luchtenberg and Jacob Schuss, who provided it is really indispensable support for making this event happen. Hannah, Jacob, thank you so much for helping me figure out how to do this and put this on. Dean Newell, thank you so much for supporting this, hosting this, having us here today, and allowing the School of Ed to support this work. And to the panelists, thank you so much for your perspectives, your time, and planning this, being in communication, and doing this today. I thought it was really fantastic. Finally, just a shout out to everybody who served on the panel, to Liz, to Erica for coordinating the work, and all of the fantastic people who unfortunately couldn't get into here today, but who did just tremendous work and will continue to do that into the future. Thank you very much, everyone. We are embarking on a new day in social studies in Illinois, and I'm so glad we could talk about it.